Mouse leave animation. While we're looking into ways scrolling can be used to trigger animations, I thought it would be interesting to listen for another event, when the mouse leaves the browser viewport. In this lesson, we'll use JavaScript to detect when a visitor is about to leave our page and has moved their mouse out of the viewport. We'll respond by showing a modal and use animation to make it really stand out. We'll also look into ways we can make sure this modal doesn't appear every time, so that we don't nag our visitors too much. To get started, open the Module 3 sample code file and look for folder 04 Start. A completed version of this lesson's code is in the folder 04 End. In this lesson, we'll look for a way to capture our visitors' attention just as they're about to leave our site, when they move their mouse cursor outside the viewport. We get started by adding some HTML to our landing page. In the file index.html near the bottom, we'll add in a container for the modal. Notice that we're putting it after the article container div closes. We're putting the modal here so that we can animate the article container out of the way. I'm using a sign-up form for the CSS Animation Weekly mailing list, but you could put whatever content you like here. Here's how it looks before we add in the code to hide it until the right moment. Let's write a function to add a class to our page when the mouse leaves the viewport. We will be able to use that class to change the visibility of this modal window. In our index.html file, in the 04 Start folder, I've added a reference to a new JavaScript file called mouseleave.js. I've also added a reference to jQuery. We'll need jQuery for this one, as it gives us a very useful mouse leave event. Opening the file mouseleave.js, we find some code that will run when jQuery is ready. Inside this, we'll add our mouse leave listener. We begin by attaching this listener to the window and passing in a function. Inside this function, we'll want to check that the to element is null, which means that the mouse has actually left the window. And if so, we'll add a class mouseOut to the HTML tag. In this case, the HTML tag is referenced as document.documentElement. Next, we need to give some way to close the modal. The HTML has a link with an ID close modal. We can target that and set up a click event listener. Inside that, we'll prevent the link action using prevent_default. Then remove the mouseOut class from the HTML tag on the page. Before we finish with this JavaScript, we might want to think about how often we want to show people this modal. At the moment, this is going to appear every time the visitor goes to press back or change a web address. This could be tiresome, so let's change the code a little so that it only asks once, and if the person says no thanks, they won't see it again. There are a couple of ways we can do this. We could set a cookie, or use local storage to remember that this visitor saw the modal already. I'd recommend using the latter. It's simpler and has fewer security issues. For this example though, I'm going to use session storage. It'll help us when testing our code as we work on it. It will only remember that the user has seen the modal for the duration of their browser session. Opening a new tab or window will be a new session. You can replace the following instances of session storage with local storage if you want to make their action last between sessions. First, we add a line to our close modal click event. We add session storage and the method setItem, in which we say the value for modal seen is true. Next, we look for this value in the mouse leave event. We set up a variable called modal seen and use getItem to retrieve this value. At this point, the value will be either true or null, so we can use this to decide whether to show the modal. Inside the if condition, we add &&, not modal seen. This will stop the modal showing if modal seen is true. Now that we have the JavaScript done, let's add some CSS to take advantage of this mouseout class being added to the HTML tag. In the file modal.css in the Style Sheets folder, we'll begin by defining what happens when the mouse leaves the viewport. We start by specifying the article container, giving it an opacity of 0, as well as setting pointer events to none so that it doesn't get in the way. For this animation, we'd like the content to scale up, so we'll use a transform. Lastly, we add a transition to smooth the state change. We transition all properties with a duration of 1 second and using a cubic Bezier that starts off very slow and speeds up. This kind of exponential ease in timing function will make it feel like the content is zooming towards us from very far away. Next, we'll add another transition to the article container. Where the first transition defines how it is to animate to the invisible state, this transition defines how it should come back. This time we want the animation to be slower, to allow time for the modal to animate out of the way. And we'll use a delay of ½ a second also for this purpose. Lastly, we'll use the opposite kind of timing function, the exponential ease out. This starts fast and slows down toward the end. Next, we need to add some styles to show and hide the modal window. The modal will begin invisible with an opacity of 0. The idea will be to have it fly into view, so for that to work, I'd like to set the scale to 0 and tilt it a little on the x-axis. And also push it a little down the screen. When it appears, it'll seem to zoom in while flying up into view. We can now set out the styles for how it would look when the mouse leaves. We type mouse out, then modal, and give it an opacity of 1. And no transform. To transition this, we'll transition both the transform and opacity properties. To give the transform some bounce, I'll be using a timing function that starts slow and zooms past before correcting position at the end. The opacity transition needs to start a little way into the movement and finish well before the transform has done its thing. Lastly, before we test this, we need to add one more transition to the modal. The animation is a bit slow when going back to the hidden state, so we'll set up a transition on the element's normal state to get it to disappear a little more quickly. There we have it. When the mouse cursor leaves the screen, the content zooms forward and disappears, while the modal window zooms into view. In this lesson, we've learned how to use the mouse leave jQuery event to add a class to our page, and use this as an opportunity to display a modal window to our leaving visitors. We made use of multiple transforms as well as the pointer events property. Being able to change the look of our pages using events like this can be very useful. It's worth checking out what sorts of other events browsers give us. In the next lesson, you'll find some more examples of scroll animations, parallax effects, and modal animations.